Will you marry me, miss? The small voice asked from the shadows. I mean, will you marry me, please, miss Cecilia? Matthew stepped out from behind the flour sacks in his tiny designer suit, far too sophisticated for a 5-year-old. Cecilia Willows was crouched in the restaurant's dim pantry, her heart hammering as the loan shark's heavy footsteps echoed through the dining room outside, hunting her like prey. She'd barely caught her breath when this polished little boy appeared, extending a plastic ring from a candy machine. She couldn't help but smile through her fear, kneeling to his level. "If I marry you," she whispered, playing along to distract them both from the shouting beyond the door, "will your daddy make the scary men leave me alone?" Matthew's face lit up with absolute certainty. "Yes, my daddy shoots monsters. He's really, really strong." Cecilia slipped the cheap ring onto her trembling finger, her eyes glistening. "Then I guess I'm yours, little prince." She had no idea that this innocent promise, made in jest to comfort a child, had just bound her to Andrew Cole, the most ruthless and powerful mafia boss the city had ever feared, a man who would take their contract with deadly, unwavering seriousness. If you're just tuning in, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more thrilling stories. Your support keeps these tales alive. Now, let's dive in. The pantry smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Cecilia pressed herself against the cold metal shelving, listening to Rico's voice grow louder in the dining room. 3 weeks overdue. That's all it took for a man like him to show up during her shift, his presence a promise of broken bones and worse. "I know you're here, sweetheart," Rico called out, his footsteps deliberate. "Your manager says you're taking inventory. Funny timing." She bit down on her knuckle to keep from whimpering. The medical bills from her mother's final months had swallowed everything, her savings, her dignity, her hope. Now she owed men who collected debts in blood. That's when she heard it, a soft shuffle behind the industrial flour sacks. A child emerged from the shadows, no more than 5 years old, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her rent. His dark eyes were solemn, assessing. He held something small in his palm, a plastic ring with a pink gem, the kind you'd get from a supermarket machine. "Don't cry," Matthew whispered. "Crying makes the monsters think they've won." Before she could respond, he knelt on one knee with startling formality. "Will you marry me, miss, please?" The absurdity of it cracked something in her chest. This boy, this beautiful, strange boy, proposing while a predator stalked just beyond the door. "If I marry you," she breathed, kneeling to meet his gaze, "will your daddy make the bad men disappear?" "Yes." His certainty was absolute. "My daddy shoots monsters." She slipped the ring on, feeling its ridiculous lightness. "Then I'm yours, little prince." Matthew's smile could have powered the city. He took her hand just as the pantry door exploded inward. But it wasn't Rico who entered. The man who filled the doorway made the air itself seem thinner. Black suit, black eyes, black soul, if the rumors were true. Andrew Cole. Even Cecilia, who avoided the news and kept her head down, knew that name. The mafia boss who controlled everything from the docks to the mayor's office. Behind him, Rico was on his knees, held there by 2 men in tactical gear. "Dad, I found my wife. You have to keep her safe. We made a contract." Andrew's gaze cut to Cecilia like a scalpel. She saw her reflection in those merciless eyes, a trembling waitress in a stained apron, wearing a child's toy ring. "Your debt," Andrew said, his voice arctic, "is now mine, as are you." He turned to Rico. "Tell your employer the account is closed, permanently." Rico fled. The guards followed. Matthew tugged Cecilia forward, chattering about their wedding cake preferences. And Cecilia, still clutching the flour sack for balance, realized she'd just traded one nightmare for something far more dangerous. She'd become the future Mrs. Cole. The car was a beast, black, armored, and silent as a hearse. Cecilia sat rigid in the leather seat, Matthew's small hand clasped in hers like an anchor, or a chain. "You'll like the house," Matthew said, swinging his legs. "It has 17 bedrooms. I counted." 17. She lived in a studio apartment with a radiator that clanked like a dying animal. Andrew sat across from them, a phone pressed to his ear, issuing orders in a language that sounded like violence wrapped in silk. Italian, maybe. Or death threats. Hard to tell the difference. When his eyes flicked to her, Cecilia looked away. She'd seen wolves at the zoo once behind glass. They had the same empty patience. The gates appeared without warning, iron, 12 feet tall, topped with cameras that swiveled like mechanical ravens. The estate beyond looked like something carved from old money and older sins. Stone facade, manicured gardens, armed men in suits stationed at every corner, their jackets failing to hide the weapons underneath. This wasn't a home. It was a fortress. "Welcome to the Cole residence," Andrew said as the car stopped. Not a welcome, a claiming. Inside, the marble floors gleamed like ice. Crystal chandeliers dripped from vaulted ceilings. Oil paintings of stern-faced men lined the walls. Ancestors, probably, who'd built this empire on bodies and bribes. A woman appeared, older, severe, her gray hair pulled into a bun tight enough to cause pain. "Sir, the room is prepared." "Cecilia," Andrew said, and she hated how her name sounded in his mouth, like something he owned. "Mrs. Volkov will show you to your quarters. You'll find appropriate clothing. Dinner is at 8. Attendance is not optional." "I should go home. I have work tomorrow." "You quit." The certainty in his voice made her blood freeze. "I didn't." "You made the call. You're compensated, generously." He adjusted his cufflinks, bored with her protest. "You live here now." "You can't just kidnap me." Matthew's hand tightened on hers. She looked down and saw fear flicker across his small face, fear that she'd leave, that she'd break her promise. Andrew stepped closer, and she smelled expensive cologne mixed with something metallic. Gunpowder, maybe. "Ongone she Lamia world. Contracts are binding, especially ones sealed with my family's ring." His gaze dropped to the plastic toy on her finger, however humble. "This is insane." "This is protection. Rico's employer won't forget you. His competitors won't either, now that you're associated with me. You're safer here." And leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. "And if you run, I'll find you. Not to hurt you, but because my son would be devastated, and I don't tolerate his suffering." He straightened, already turning away. "Mrs. Volkov, see to her needs." As Cecilia was led deeper into the mansion, Matthew trailing behind, chattering about the library and the indoor pool, she understood the truth. She hadn't escaped her cage. She'd just traded it for a gilded one, guarded by the most dangerous man in the city. The revelation came from Mrs. Volkov 3 days into Cecilia's captivity. "He hasn't spoken in 8 months, the housekeeper said, folding towels with military precision. "Not since his mother died. Specialists, therapists, psychiatrists, Mr. Cole flew them in from everywhere. Switzerland, Vienna, Tokyo. Nothing worked." Cecilia set down her coffee cup, the porcelain clicking against marble. "But Matthew talks to me constantly about his toy cars, his favorite books, his—" "Exactly." Mrs. Volkov's expression softened for the first time since they'd met. "You're the first person he's spoken to since the funeral." Mr. Cole noticed immediately. That explained the surveillance, the way Andrew appeared in doorways, watching them play chess in the library, the quiet observations during breakfast when Matthew chattered about his dreams while Cecilia braided his hair, teaching him the pattern. It explained why she was still here. That evening, Andrew summoned her to his office. The room was all dark wood and darker intentions, shelves of leather-bound books that looked unread, a desk large enough to hide bodies beneath.
He stood by the window, silhouetted against the city lights he controlled. Sit. She remained standing. Small rebellions were all she had left. His jaw tightened, but he let it pass. The doctors said Matthew's mutism is psychological. Trauma from witnessing his mother's death. A car accident. He was in the back seat, unhurt physically, destroyed otherwise. Cecilia's throat constricted. I'm sorry. I don't want your sympathy. He turned, and the overhead light caught the exhaustion carved into his face. I want you to understand why you can't leave. You're not a prisoner. You're a necessity. I'm not a therapist. You're better. You're someone he chose. Andrew crossed to a cabinet, poured 2 fingers of amber liquor into a crystal glass. He didn't offer her one. My son asked me one thing in 8 months of silence. He asked me in that pantry to keep you safe. Those were his first words since his mother died. The weight of that confession settled over her like snow. Every morning he wakes up asking if you're still here. Every night he makes me promise you'll be here tomorrow. If you leave, he'll stop talking again, I know it. So I'm trapped. So you're essential. He drank, watching her over the rim. I'll triple what your restaurant paid. You'll have access to anything you need, but you will stay until Matthew is whole again. And if he's never whole again? Andrew's smile was a knife in the dark. Then you and I will grow very familiar with each other, Miss Willows. She heard the unspoken truth beneath his words. She wasn't just Matthew's lifeline. She was becoming Andrew's too.
The dress arrived in a garment bag that probably cost more than her old car. Midnight blue silk that pooled like water. Diamonds sewn into the bodice like captured stars. Mrs. Volkov had laid it across the bed with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. Mr. Cole expects you ready by 7, she'd said. The gala is mandatory. Now Cecilia stood in front of the mirror, barely recognizing herself. Her hair had been swept up by a stylist who'd appeared without warning. Her face, professionally made up, looked like it belonged to someone who attended events like this. Someone who hadn't served coffee to men like Andrew Cole just weeks ago. He was waiting at the bottom of the grand staircase, devastating in a tailored tuxedo. His eyes tracked her descent with an intensity that made her stumble on the last step. His hand shot out, steadying her, and remained at the small of her back. Possessive, deliberate. You'll stay beside me tonight, he said, guiding her toward the waiting car. You'll smile. You'll let me introduce you as my fiancé. You'll play the role convincingly. Why? She slid into the car, the dress whispering against leather. Why do this publicly? Because in my world, perception is armor. He settled beside her, close enough that she felt the heat radiating from him. My enemies see Matthew's attachment to you. They'll try to use you against me, unless I make it clear that you're not a weakness. You're an extension of my power. The ballroom glittered with old money and older sins. Crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, women in gowns worth more than small countries. But beneath the elegance, Cecilia felt the predators circling. These weren't socialites. They were sharks in evening wear. Andrew's hand never left her waist as he moved through the crowd, introducing her to men with cold eyes and colder handshakes. My fiancée, Cecilia Willows. Each time, she felt the calculation in their gazes, assessing her worth, her vulnerabilities, her threat level. Then she appeared. Valentina Russo moved through the crowd like poison in a Versace gown. Scarlet silk, blood-red lips, eyes that could cut glass. She stopped directly in front of them, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. Andrew, her accent was Italian, cultured. Lethal. I heard rumors. I didn't believe them. A waitress. My fiancée, Andrew corrected, his voice dropping to sub-zero. Show respect, Valentina. Respect, she laughed, the sound like breaking crystal. The Russo family has been allied with the Coles for 3 generations. Our engagement was arranged before we could walk, and you replace me with this." Andrew's muscles tensed beneath his jacket. "We were never engaged. Your father's delusions don't constitute contracts." Valentina's gaze fixed on Cecilia, stripping her bare. "You have no idea what you've walked into, little girl. Andrew's world eats women like you for breakfast." "Enough." Andrew's command cut through the ambient noise. Around them, conversations died. Touch her, threaten her, or even look at her wrong, and the Russo family will learn what happens when they challenge me. Valentina's smile widened. "Oh, Andrew, you just made her the most valuable target in this room." She swept away, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and promised violence. Cecilia's hands trembled. Andrew noticed, his grip tightening on her waist, protective or possessive she couldn't tell anymore. "Welcome," he murmured against her ear, "to underworld etiquette."
The restaurant was the kind of place Cecilia had only seen in magazines. Private room, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a single table set with roses so red they looked like they'd been dipped in blood. "This is excessive," she said, accepting the chair Andrew pulled out for her. "This is Tuesday." He sat across from her, signaling the sommelier. "You need to acclimate to your new life, starting with learning how to exist in spaces like this without looking like you want to bolt." "I do want to bolt." "I know." Something almost like amusement flickered in his eyes. "But you won't, for Matthew." The meal arrived in courses, tiny, artful portions that probably required tweezers to plate. They ate in careful silence, the tension between them drawn tight as wire. She was reaching for her wine when she noticed Andrew's hand drift to his jacket. His phone hadn't buzzed. No one had entered, but every muscle in his body had gone predator still. "Under the table," he said quietly. "Now." "What?" "Now, Cecilia." She dropped just as the window exploded. Glass rained down like crystallized violence. The sommelier collapsed, a red bloom spreading across his white jacket. Andrew was already moving, his gun appearing from nowhere, firing twice into the darkness beyond the shattered window. A body fell from the neighboring rooftop. "Stay down," commanded Andrew, his voice utterly calm, like he was commenting on the weather. He moved to the door, yanked it open. 2 men in tactical gear stormed in. Andrew shot the first one through the throat before he'd fully crossed the threshold. The second one got off a round that shattered a wine bottle inches from Cecilia's head. Andrew closed the distance in 3 strides, too fast for human, and drove a knife up through the man's jaw into his brain. The body crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the violence. Andrew straightened, adjusting his cufflinks, barely breathing hard. Blood speckled his white shirt like a Jackson Pollock painting. He pulled out his phone, spoke into it with terrifying composure. 3 hostiles down. Valentina's signature. "Yes, clean it. We'll need a new venue." He pocketed his phone, then finally looked at Cecilia. She was still under the table, shaking, her dress soaked in spilled wine and probably blood. "Are you hurt?" His voice was clinically detached, like he was a doctor checking symptoms. She couldn't speak, couldn't reconcile this efficient killing machine with the man who'd braided Matthew's hair that morning. Andrew crouched down, offering his hand. It was steady. Hers trembled violently as she took it. "This is who I am." He pulled her to feet amid the carnage. "Matthew tried to warn you. I'm the monster who shoots other monsters. The question is whether you can live with that." He guided her past the bodies, his hand gentle on her elbow, as if they were simply leaving after a disappointing meal. Outside, roses still bloomed in the restaurant's garden boxes. Inside, 3 men would never see morning. It happened during the morning walk.
Matthew insisted on visiting the garden every day at 10, and Cecilia had grown comfortable with the routine. The guards flanked them at a distance, respectful of the boy's need for normalcy. She should have known better. Comfort in Andrew's world was an illusion. The van came from nowhere, screeching through the garden gate that someone had left conveniently open. 3 men in masks, moving with military efficiency. One guard went down immediately, blood spraying across the roses. The other reached for his weapon but hesitated. Matthew was in the crossfire. That hesitation cost him his life. Cecilia barely had time to scream before a cloth clamped over her mouth, chemical sweet and suffocating. The world tilted sideways. She heard Matthew shrieking her name, his voice raw with terror, before darkness swallowed everything. She woke in a warehouse, the kind that smelled of rust and old violence. Her hands were zip-tied to a metal chair. Across from her, Valentina Russo sat on a crate, examining her manicure with theatrical boredom. "You're awake. Good," Valentina smiled. "Andrew has 1 hour to surrender himself to my father, or I start sending you back to him in pieces, starting with your fingers. They're very important for waitressing, no?" Cecilia's mind raced through her options. She had none, except Matthew's gift. That morning he'd insisted she wear the watch he'd given her. "It's special," he'd said with that solemn intensity, "like spy stuff. Press the button twice if you're scared and I can't find you." She'd thought it was a toy, a child's fantasy. But Andrew Cole didn't give his son toys. He gave him weapons disguised as comfort. While Valentina paced, making theatrical phone calls to Andrew, describing in detail what she'd do to his pet waitress, Cecilia worked the watch around her wrist until the crown was accessible. She pressed it twice. A faint vibration confirmed activation. Now she just had to stay alive. "Tell me," Valentina said, crouching in front of her, "what's it like, being Andrew Cole's weakness? Does it feel powerful, or does it feel like wearing a target?" "Both," Cecilia answered honestly, "but at least I'm not desperate enough to kidnap people for attention." The slap split her lip, blood filled her mouth, copper and warm. "Careful, little waitress. Andrew isn't here to protect you." "No," said a voice from the shadows, cold as a grave, "but I am." Andrew emerged from the darkness like death taking physical form. Behind him, his men poured through entrances Cecilia hadn't known existed. The warehouse erupted in gunfire. Valentina ran. She made it 5 steps before Andrew shot her in the leg, dropping her like a stone. He was at Cecilia's side in seconds, cutting her restraints with a blade that appeared from nowhere. "You're safe." "Matthew's watch." "I know. Smart girl." He cupped her bleeding face, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something beyond ice in his eyes. Fear, raw and devastating. "If they'd killed you, I would have burned this city to ash."
The duffel bag sat on the bed between them like a confession. Black canvas, unremarkable, except for the fact that it contained more money than Cecilia would earn in 10 lifetimes. "5 million, Andrew said from where he stood by the window, his back to her. "Unmarked bills, untraceable, enough to disappear anywhere in the world. New identity included if you want it." 3 days had passed since the warehouse. 3 days of Matthew clinging to her like she might evaporate, of Andrew watching her with an expression she couldn't decode, of her own thoughts spiraling between terror and something far more dangerous. "I don't understand," she managed. "You were right. This life, my life, it's a target you didn't ask to wear." He turned finally, and the exhaustion in his face made him look almost human. "I can't guarantee your safety. Valentina was just the beginning. Others will come. They'll always come." "So you're letting me go?" "I'm giving you a choice. The one I stole from you in that pantry." He gestured to the bag. "Take it. Walk away. I'll tell Matthew you had to leave for family reasons. I'll handle his heartbreak. It's not your responsibility." She stared at the money. Freedom. Safety.
Everything she'd wanted before a 5-year-old boy proposed in a restaurant pantry and turned her world inside out. "What about you?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Something flickered in his eyes. "What about me?" "You'll be alone, with Matthew and all of this." She gestured vaguely at the mansion, the empire, the violence that clung to him like expensive cologne. "I've always been alone, Cecilia. I'm well practiced." The door burst open. Matthew stood there in his dinosaur pajamas, his face crumpled with tears. Behind him, Mrs. Volkoff looked apologetic. "He heard you talking," she said quietly. Matthew ran to Cecilia, wrapping his arms around her waist with desperate strength. "Don't go. Please don't go. I'll be good. I'll be so good. I promise." Her heart shattered. She looked at Andrew over Matthew's head, saw the carefully blank expression he wore, the way his hands had become fists at his sides. "Matthew," she whispered, kneeling, "your daddy is giving me a choice. Choose us." His voice broke. "Choose me. I chose you first in the pantry, remember?" She did remember. A little boy offering protection with a plastic ring, believing so completely that his daddy could fix anything. And maybe he could. Andrew Cole could topple governments, destroy empires, bend the city to his will. But he couldn't make someone stay if they wanted to leave. Cecilia looked at the duffel bag. $5 million. Freedom. Then she looked at Matthew's tear-stained face, at Andrew's carefully controlled devastation. She zipped the bag closed and pushed it across the bed toward Andrew. "I'm not running from monsters anymore. I'm staying with the one who shoots them." Andrew's exhale was barely audible, but his eyes, God, his eyes held more gratitude than words could carry. Matthew's sob of relief was the sweetest sound she'd ever heard.
They came at midnight, when the moon was dark and the city held its breath. Cecilia woke to gunfire, not the distant pop of fireworks, but the visceral crack of assault rifles that shook the windows. She was out of bed instantly, running down the hall toward Matthew's room in nothing but a silk nightgown, her heart a war drum in her chest. Andrew appeared from the opposite direction, already armed, already moving with that deadly efficiency she'd come to recognize. Get Matthew to the safe room, now. What's happening? The Russos, final play. He pressed a gun into her hands, cold, heavy, terrifyingly real. Safety's off. Point and shoot. Don't hesitate. Then he was gone, disappearing down the stairs toward the sound of systematic destruction. Matthew was awake, sitting up in bed with preternatural calm. Is it bad guys? Yes, baby. She pulled him from the bed, trying to keep her voice steady. We're going to play hide and seek in the special room, okay? The safe room was behind a false panel in the library, reinforced steel, separate ventilation, enough supplies to last a week. Andrew had shown it to her after the kidnapping, his voice matter-of-fact. If it ever comes to this, you lock yourselves in and wait for my signal, no one else's. They were halfway down the hall when the window at the far end exploded inward. A man in tactical gear repelled through, weapons sweeping. His eyes locked on Cecilia and Matthew. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. She raised Andrew's gun and fired. The recoil nearly broke her wrist. The shot went wide, shattering a Ming vase. But it was enough. The man dove for cover, giving her precious seconds to shove Matthew through a doorway and slam it shut. "The library," she gasped. "Run!" They sprinted through the mansion while gunfire echoed from every direction. Glass shattered. Men shouted in Italian. Somewhere, someone was screaming. The library doors loomed ahead. Almost there. Almost. Another operative emerged from a side room, weapon raised. Cecilia pushed Matthew behind her, standing between him and the gun, her own weapon trembling in her grip. "Move," the accented English ordered. "No." His finger tightened on the trigger. She fired first. This time she didn't miss. The man dropped, and Cecilia stood frozen, staring at what she'd done. The blood, the stillness, the absolute finality of taking a life. "Cecilia," Matthew's small hand tugged her sleeve. "We have to go."
She moved mechanically, getting them into the safe room, sealing the door. The walls muffled the violence outside to distant thunder. Matthew curled into her lap, and she held him with one arm while gripping the gun with the other. Minutes or hours passed. Time became elastic, meaningless. Then 3 knocks. Pause. 2 knocks. Andrew's signal. She opened the door to carnage. Bodies in the hallway, blood on the marble, and Andrew standing in the center of it all, looking like a dark angel of vengeance. His eyes found hers, traveled to the gun in her hand, to the body visible through the doorway behind them. "You killed for him," he said, not a question, an acknowledgement. "I killed for us," she corrected. His smile was terrible and beautiful. "Then you're truly mine." The cathedral was a fortress disguised as a house of God. Armed men in tailored suits lined every pew, their eyes scanning for threats, even as organ music swelled through vaulted ceilings. Outside, the city's most powerful families had gathered, not to celebrate, but to acknowledge the shift in power. Cecilia Willows was about to become Cecilia Cole, and in Andrew's world, that meant something. She stood in the antechamber, staring at her reflection in a full-length mirror. The dress was a masterpiece, ivory silk and French lace, custom-made by a designer who'd flown in from Milan. Diamonds glittered at her throat, real ones this time, each stone worth more than her mother's entire medical debt. Mrs. Volkoff adjusted her veil with surprising tenderness. "He's waiting for you, and he never waits for anyone." The doors opened. The congregation rose as one. Cecilia walked down the aisle alone, no father to give her away, no family to witness this transformation. Just her, moving toward the man who'd claimed her with a child's plastic ring and bound her with something far more permanent. Andrew stood at the altar in a black suit that probably cost more than a car, his eyes tracking her approach with an intensity that made her breath catch. Beside him, Matthew clutched the ring pillow, practically vibrating with excitement in his miniature tuxedo. The ceremony was traditional, the priest's words about love and commitment ringing with irony in a room full of criminals. But when Andrew slipped the ring onto her finger, platinum with a diamond that could fund a small country, his hands were gentle. "With this ring," he said, his voice carrying through the cathedral, "I give you my name, my protection, and everything I am." The priest declared them husband and wife. Andrew's kiss was possessive, claiming, a promise and a warning witnessed by everyone who mattered in their world. The reception was held in the Cole Mansion's ballroom, transformed into something from a fairy tale. Crystal, champagne, an orchestra playing Vivaldi. But beneath the elegance, Cecilia felt the shift. People who'd looked through her at the gala now bowed their heads in respect. Valentina's father approached with stiff formality to offer congratulations, his daughter's failed coup having cost the Russos dearly. She was no longer the waitress playing dress-up. She was Mrs. Cole, the Mafia queen. Matthew appeared at her side during the first dance, tugging her dress. Andrew released her immediately, kneeling to his son's level. "What is it, Matthew?" The boy looked between them, his eyes shining. Then, in a clear voice for the nearest tables to hear, he said the word that shattered every remaining wall around Cecilia's heart. "Mommy, dance with me too?" The ballroom went silent. Andrew's hand found Cecilia's, squeezing hard enough to hurt. Matthew hadn't called anyone that since his mother died. Cecilia dropped to her knees, pulling the boy into her arms, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. "Yes, baby, always." Andrew's hands settled on both their heads, protective and possessive. His family, his empire, his world. And Cecilia, who'd once hidden in pantries from loan sharks, now stood at the center of it all, not as a victim, but as a queen who'd earned her crown in blood and love. The plastic ring from that first night sat in a velvet box in her room, more precious than any diamond. Some contracts, she'd learned, were worth keeping. Moral lessons.
Sometimes the most unexpected encounters change our lives forever. Cecilia's story teaches us that true strength isn't about never being afraid, it's about choosing courage even when fear tries to consume us. Love can be found in the darkest places, and family isn't always defined by blood, but by the promises we choose to keep. Most importantly, we learn that protecting those we love can transform us into the person we were always meant to become. If you enjoyed this story of danger, redemption, and unlikely love, please like, subscribe, comment, and share this video with others who love thrilling romance. Your support helps us bring you more captivating stories. Drop a comment below telling us what you thought of Cecilia and Andrew's journey. Would you have stayed or taken the money? We'd love to hear from you.